Hey everyone, welcome to Direct to Disaster. Hey, guess what? We're still looking at bootleg plug-and-play games. Yeah, it turns out that bootlegs are sort of like the Vidian phage from Star Trek Voyager. They're disgusting, they're hazardous to your health and sanity, they infect every outlet they can find in hopes of finding new hosts, and there's no visible cure. When whatever market they were leeching off changes, and store owners finally realize that those cheap hunks of plastic hidden in the back of their shelves are actually hurting the quality they're trying to promote, they just morph into a new product and continue quietly stealing people's time and money they could be spending on something actually worth playing. I mean, if you had $40, what would you rather buy? One good game with state-of-the-art graphics and a compelling story that you want to play over and over again, or 50 horrible games with outdated graphics and gameplay that won't keep your attention for more than 5 seconds. And really, it should be as obvious as that. But apparently somebody's buying these since they keep making them! I mean, what idiot would see one of these things lying around, pick it up, decide it's worth actually playing, and then advertise his opinion to the whole world and let other people know that these things exist? Guy's a freaking moron. In the last video, we talked about all the 8-bit knockoffs I happen to own, and believe me, that's an experience I never want to repeat. The clunky graphics, the annoying music, the constant reusing of games all across the consoles, and the overall lack of any fun or creativity has convinced me that staring at a wall while sumo wrestlers beat my head in with tuning forks is a much better use of my time than ever having to turn on one of these things ever again. But here we are again, because it's time to look at the next generation of bootleg consoles. Yep. The market shook off one parasite just to have a new and improved one slap itself in its place. The days of 8-bit gaming are over. It's time to look at the 16 and 32-bit era. So after the 8-bit bootleg market made them around $5 in profit, and people finally realized, hey, these things are piles of crap, underground game companies decided to see how much they could make if they doubled the bits. So instead of ripping off NES games, they're ripping off consoles like the Genesis and the Super Nintendo. And only a scant 15 years after all the other developers have abandoned the market. Yes, these actually managed to coexist with the Wii, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. Well, I guess it's good to know that by 2025, when we get the Xbox Infinity, that the latest Playbox U or whatever will feature Nintendo 64 graphics. And the 298 games included will have you begging for Superman 64 or Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue. But, and this might sound crazy, is that really so bad? The Super Nintendo is arguably the greatest system of all time, bringing us a library of games that still hold up over 20 years later and that showed just what gaming hardware was capable of. I mean, they were replicating 3D graphics and real orchestral scores on primitive gaming hardware and giving us deep, fun, and compelling stories with immersive gameplay, while other, arguably more advanced consoles thought that quality was represented by how many cheap video clips they could squish onto a CD.
We want to get big, hammer cheap like what Arnold got in Hollywood, huh?
And while admittedly, we do like to watch no-budget online reviewers torture themselves watching these cheesy FMV titles, it's the wonder and the outstanding effort of the SNES that keeps us coming back to its library, and that has inspired us to create a lot of modern retro titles that constantly show that all because it's old doesn't mean it's outdated. So with all that in mind, maybe these consoles won't be that bad. I mean, if those consoles constantly push the limits of what's possible, and these are emulating those in an era where there are far fewer restrictions to game programming, then maybe the designers have also dedicated themselves to seeing how far they can push the limits. Maybe they've decided to give us a truly retro gaming experience, creating worlds that push the boundaries of their hardware, and giving us 3-dimensional gameplay from 2D sprites and backdrops. And maybe, just maybe, they've created games that will live on in our hearts and minds and stand the test of time for all eternity. And maybe my hat will sprout wings and fly me off to Pluto to dance with pink leprechauns. Let's just dive in and see what misery awaits us in this new generation of knockoffs. So a theme that most of the consoles I own share is that they're all Wii knockoffs, being released between 2007 and 2012, when the Wii was in its prime. The thin plastic casing, the vertical stance, the blue plastic on the front to simulate the light from the non-existent disc tray, the fact that it's trying to be wider than Glenn Beck eating Wonder Bread. And of course, the wireless controllers, which are designed to look like Wii remotes. Well, maybe from a distance, but this is the feature they're really trying to push about these consoles. Yeah, remember the ads showing off the Wii's wireless capabilities? Remember how cool they looked and how everyone went, "Holy crap, I'm not just using a controller, I am the controller!" And then remember getting it home and realizing that most of the games for it just involved you shaking the controller or tilting it left and right, and that it lost connection constantly, and its library was filled with shovelware that tried to cash in by offering the barest of motion detection capabilities. And don't get me wrong, the Wii was a good console with great online capabilities and a fair amount of really good games. But most of its advertisement was towards its motion control, which, admit it, was just a novelty that barely worked and almost never took advantage of its full potential. But since that's the feature Nintendo was proud of, that's how the clones advertise themselves. Even the systems that only very vaguely look like the Wii try their hardest to make you think they function just like it. Hell, the boxes just parade the fact that they're wireless. That's how desperate they are to convince you they're the real deal. But hey, Nintendo did it first. Each console is surprisingly really light, none of them going over a pound. I guess that makes sense since they don't need to read discs or house storage space, but look, they're lighter than regular plug-and-play games. Makes me wonder what else they took out of these that could have been useful. Thankfully, these feel sturdier than the 8-bit games and less I'm going to snap the minute you push a button. Also, most of them run on batteries, which in this case, why? I mean, with a regular plug-and-play game, it makes sense, since they're designed for travel and everything's installed on one box. But these are trying to emulate real consoles, and the controllers are separate, so it's more likely people are going to sit these next to their TV than take them on a car trip. Now, most come with an AC adapter anyway, so just have them plug into a wall outlet. But besides those similarities, each one is surprisingly different. Yeah, unlike the other systems that were basically just repackagings of the same games over and over again, each one of these is a unique design, with varying libraries of games. And since I own significantly fewer of these than I did the 8-bit systems, I guess we can go over each one and see if any of these are better than their knockoff status represents. You hear that? I'm giving you a chance. One chance to prove yourself. Don't screw it up. First up, the My Sports Challenge Plus, because let's start with the one that looks the least like a Wii. This one comes from our old friends at Scenario, who you might remember as the company responsible for the best and the worst Guitar Hero clones I've ever played. They also brought us several of the really bad 8-bit bootlegs, as well as the Max Play, which is probably the least smelly of that crap pile. So I guess you could say the company certainly goes to extremes for its products. So as the name suggests, the console is dedicated solely to sports games. Baseball, basketball, golf, bowling, horseshoes, even curling. Guess they had to fill up the 20 games title somehow. And I'll say it right now, because this is probably one of the few positive points I'll give to these consoles, but the graphics are surprisingly good. Maybe it's just relief after having to play hundreds of terrible 8-bit games with colors that make your eyes bleed, but this game has sprites that actually look like something, and the colors fit where they're applied to. I mean, okay, the backdrops are as bland as hell with no dimension or creativity, and the models look like those stupid Sims games for the GBA, but at least I can say that they tried. There was some actual effort put into these, and to whoever the designer is, I friggin' salute you! You have no idea how good it feels after weeks of playing 8-bit abominations to actually switch on a game that doesn't make my cornea want to commit suicide. If they had applied this quality to every aspect of every game, I would have no complaints. But they didn't. Like I mentioned, each console tries to impersonate the Wii by implementing motion control into their controllers. But while the Wii at least tries to mimic the movements of the player, all these controls amount to is shake to push a button. That's seriously the whole scope of these controls. Moving the remote is the same as if you push the A button on a regular controller. Look, I'm turning my TV off and on with motion controls. And that's really all these games are. Most of them just have you throwing something at a target, so all you do is shake the remote when the two arrows are in the right place. And it flat out shows you where you need to stop them to score. So once you have it down, you can just time your shakes to hit the target every time. There's no strategy, no atmosphere, no sense that you're actually playing what they say you're playing. And they go on forever, just round after round of hitting the same target. Okay, some of the games actually require you to aim and control the force of the projectile, but for the most part, it's just the same repetitive motions over and over. Woo! I'm playing basketball! I just scored a point! And another! 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 And how long is this game? Also, is that pink in the background? I only like pirated 16-bit renditions of popular music. If I entered it, thank you very much. The only game I can say I had fun playing on here is this mini-golf game. There's variety in the courses, it requires some thinking and some geometry, and it reminds me of some PC mini-golf games I played as a kid. But even this one seems to go on for an eternity. It's just the same colors, same terrain, same looping music track. Yeah, sorry, without some Nintendo characters or Sega mascots to liven things up, this console's just a waste of time. So moving on, let's look at the reactor. Now this is actually a really cool design, looking like the Wii but just different enough to be called its own console. The rounded body, the flat base, the blue plastic on the mouth and top, it's simple but surprisingly creative. And the controls share a similar design, with the entire remote a smooth sort of hourglass shape compared to the boxy Wii remote. Yeah, what's with Nintendo and just shaping their consoles like boxes?
Oh, don't you talk about my boxes! I like boxes!
So we might as well start with the sports games, since that seems to be the genre of choice for these consoles. Yeah, if 8-bit was mostly racing and puzzles, the next generation is sports games. Because, hey, Nintendo did it, so it must be the next big thing. So let's try competitive fencing and see... Whoa! Okay, these title screens don't mess around. So here's a surprise. Most of the sports games on here are surprisingly really good. Or at least they're better than the last console. Each one is set up like a real game, with a menu, selection screens, options, and even instructions. Yeah, instructions are a plus with these consoles. And the graphics are fantastic. This is rotoscoping and digitized images at their finest. Fluid, responsive, and very professional looking. They sort of remind me of Mortal Kombat or Clay Fighter, and Anything that reminds me of those has definitely scored some points. The quality of the gameplay depends on what you're playing. With competitive fencing, it's a standard fencing game. Each player strikes the other with his or her fencing sword to be the first to gain 15 points and win the round. It's a pretty basic but fun fighting game, with the buttons actually controlling the movements of the fighter depending on how you press them. Tennis is not as good. Just swing the remote and you'll never miss. Baseball is baseball, and it's a really good interpretation for a system like this. Not only do you get to choose and manage your team before the game, but the hitting and pitching in the game has a lot more strategy and timing involved than just shake the remote. So the game almost feels like you're playing baseball. Though at first I thought it was glitched since the players refused to run from base to base, but then I found out you had to rapidly tap A after you hit the ball. There's not a lot of other things you can do with this game, but I think they covered enough. Oh, and the digitized commentary by the play-by-play announcer, incredible.
And it's home run! Oh my, oh my!
Swimming, on the other hand, I can't get to do anything. I press every button on the controller, and only rarely can I get them to even move. And fishing...
Gosh! Gosh!
I don't get it. So with the sports games being so good, I'm a little shocked that the arcade games on here are mediocre at best. Most of the games are 16-bit versions of some of the games featured on 8-bit consoles, like MotorStorm, which is an upgrade of VR Racer, Archery, which is a better-looking Golden Arrow, Fireman, which is Firefighter, and Bee-Fighter, which is Galaga. But while the graphical upgrades and the more tolerable music really help these games to be more playable, they all still have the same gameplay that makes it hard to play them for more than 2 minutes. Then there's a chess game, a Sudoku game, a Tetris game, a Dance Dance Revolution wannabe, and a really sad Bomberman game. Look at this! He's been reduced to blowing up caterpillars. His life just hasn't been the same since they tried to replace him with that other robot. Oh, and Zuma. Yeah, try playing Zuma with this controller. So overall, the library's pretty bad and unmemorable, except for one saving grace.
Oh, yeah!
This is probably the most effort I've ever seen in a game for an unofficial console. It's sort of a Golden Axe meets Gauntlet action-adventure game where you control a blonde Conan the Barbarian with one objective: rescue your girlfriend and slay everything in your path. I don't know if this is a ripoff of something, but it is awesome! You fight all the great fantasy adventure monsters in this game. Skeletons, possess suits of armor, giant spiders, and hell, even ninjas! Wielding only your trusty sword and these shurikens you find in barrels. Okay, the title sounds like a Dungeons & Dragons nerdcore group, the controls are pretty clunky, and it only takes about 10 minutes to beat, but the fluid animation, the wicked digitized choral theme, and the fact that it's an actual action game and not just another racing game or shooter makes it the best game I'll ever see on one of these. In fact, with a little tweaking, it could easily have been a Sega Genesis game. And speaking of which, I guess I should mention that like with a lot of bootleg consoles, there are a lot of different versions of this. My version has 32 built-in games, but other variants can have 42 or even 100 different games. But the content and build ultimately depends on who's marketing it. While I have the cool-looking version, there's also one that's more rectangular and looks more like the Wii, as well as a handheld version that somehow has over 120 different games. Also, there's a black-colored variant called the Zone 60, which I can't tell if it's a relabeling of this console or a completely different system altogether, just with the same build. Though I do know that games from the system are also included on other Zone consoles, which other consoles and other lines then copied. Or maybe the Zone library was taken from those other libraries, and the Zone is the primary console that the Reactor is ripped off from, or maybe they're all made by the same company under different names and different locations just to match the market, or maybe...
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it!
But my point is that at least one variant was marketed by At Games, which contained licensed Sega games and was marketed as the Sega Reactor. So this Reactor, which contains a Sega Genesis-like game, has a variant that actually contains Sega Genesis games. That may or may not have been the same company that made the first one. Forget the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, try matching up who made what console. Anyway, the Sega Reactor was only released in the UK, so I can't get it, and even if I could, it probably wouldn't work on my American TV. But then they released another variant that I can get, called the Sega Arcade Motion. And gee, is this a Sega licensed product? I could never tell. I mean, the freaking console is shaped like a Sonic the Hedgehog silhouette. This is like if Nintendo released an NES collection shaped like Mario. You know, come to think of it, why hasn't Nintendo released its own collection system? I mean, we already have the Atari and Television and ColecoVision flashback consoles, and you can get the NES library on pretty much any bootleg X and 1 game cartridge, so why don't they just put some of their older games on one of these and make it official? Make some money off the buzz, man! So since this is actually a licensed console, and you can probably find it in the toy aisle of Walmart, you might think it doesn't belong in this video, but I have a counter to that argument. Ta-da! We knock off, it belongs, I say so! So the controllers are mostly the same as the Reactor's remotes, with a few cosmetic differences, like the top and bottom being flatter and the buttons a lot smaller. Oh, and it's blue, very important to note. Also, it has an on-off switch on the top, which I guess is a good thing, since heaven forbid anyone wear the batteries out in between playing sessions. And whenever you push a button or move it, a red light flashes for about a second for some reason. As I said, this is an actual licensed console from Sega, and it contains some of the more memorable Genesis titles. Alex Kidd, Vector Man, Echo the Dolphin, Golden Axe, and of course a whole truckload of Sonic the Hedgehog games. And what's really interesting is that for some of these games, you can select which level of the game you want to start on. But we're not here to have fun. We're here to look at what they stuffed the rest of the console with. Starting with the sports again, you can tell why they needed Sega to sell this thing. The graphics are very cartoony, and the gameplay is really limited, going back to the shake the remote and see what happens the MySports Plus gave us, which, after the Reactor showed us what could be accomplished with this technology, is really disappointing. In baseball, you just swing the remote and watch a cutscene of what happens next. And they seem to be completely random. By using the same force and weakly swinging the bat whenever the ball's anywhere close to me, I've either gotten my players on base or scored home runs. So not even the timing strategy's involved here. Bowling, you swing the remote when the power's almost full, and you're guaranteed to strike almost any time. The fishing game is just an update of the Dream Gears, but thankfully without the fishing reel attachment. The tennis and ping pong games barely even register when I hit the ball, so every match always goes to the computer. And for some reason, even though the other games are given their normal names, they decide to rename golf to It's Tea Time. Ha ha ha. And yeah, the golf's just golf. But the worst game on here is the World of Boxing. There is absolutely no strategy involved. Just keep shaking the remote and he'll go down eventually. And when I say eventually, I mean look at how long it takes to take him down. got one fight, and that's it. And we see that our champion is Street Fighter's Ryu with jaundice. Oh, but if you think the sports games are bad, the other games on here are some of the worst I've ever played. Like the Reactor, most are just the same monotonous 8-bit games with 16-bit graphics. But unlike the Reactor, where I could tell there was some effort put into making them entertaining, these are just straight up ports of these games with changed graphics. The same puzzles, the same clones of much better games, even the same strange names. Curling 2010 is actually a dodgeball game where the objective is to throw all the balls into the other player's field. And what they call checkers is like one of those pig jumping games that have a Cracker Barrel. And all that does is remind me how much I want some pot roast right now. Fish Story is a straight up feeding frenzy clone, to the point where the fish you control is one of the fish from that game, but strangely not one you play as in the actual game. And it has the stupidest startup screen I've probably ever seen in any game ever. When the stage numbers come down, instead of just starting the level, it just sits there. I mean, you can move your player around, but you can't do anything, so originally I thought the game was broken. But then I realized you have to pop the bubbles with the fish before the game will start. That's like if in Mario you couldn't start the level until you hit 50 coins out of a block. Just start the game already! These are already the most boring and repetitive games in existence. They don't need any more help. Oh, but it gets even better, because not only did they include unplayable arcade-style games, but another section is included that's made up of puzzle games. Puzzle games! As if we didn't already have enough of those! There's some memory games, some brain teasers, some code-style games, and of course, Sudoku. Because we can't just let that game die! And the sad part is, these games could have been easily fixed. Reduce the time we have for each game, implement a high scoreboard, put some animation in these backgrounds, just give us some kind of competitive atmosphere. A game designed to keep me on my toes should not make me want to fall asleep. This just blows my mind on so many levels. You have permission from Sega to make and market a compilation of some of their best games, and then you spend all your focus on promoting your putrid piles of poorly programmed pus. That's like being served filet mignons and lobster and then just dousing it in ketchup and peanut butter. You've taken something that people were really proud of and probably took a lot of time and effort to make, and you made it something people just want to throw in the trash. But what really baffles me is that they later released an updated version of this called the Genesis Flashback, which not only contains over 40 Sega classics, including the whole Streets of Rage and Golden Axe series, but the ability to play actual Sega cartridges. And they still included their lame library of games! Guys, you've recreated a retro console people are clamoring for! You don't need to stuff your catastrophic cheap crap in there! People aren't gonna play them. They're just gonna make videos mocking you for thinking we'd be interested. You've taken the opportunity to have a well-respected, high-quality image, and you've completely shredded it. So while I should be giving praise to this console for introducing a way for a new generation to experience the best of 16-bit gaming, that was never their intention. Their intention was to push their waste of time and effort on us and hide behind a famous company name to promote it. If this was just an official compilation like it's supposed to be and like what their other products are like, then I would have no problem. But as is, it fails to entertain us, and it drags a company's name in the mud behind it. So if you'll excuse me, I need to put this where this belongs. Next is the Ping Pong TV game. I actually had a lot to say about this one, but when I tried to record footage, the console gave out and refuses to display video. The best I could get were some flashes of colored lines, but nothing I can actually show you. Just goes to show how reliable things are when the developers don't care about what they're making. Well, at least we can look at the box, which is usually the best part of any bootleg thanks to the amount of care they don't give. So first, you gotta love how this console is just called the Ping Pong TV game, like they were just that unoriginal. Oh, but if you forgot what it's called, not only do they repeat the exact same image on the back of the box and have the name on 3 sides, but it says in big blue letters, Ping Pong, right next to the title, just in case you missed it the first time. New Sport Pioneer! So, generic McPurple shirt here is the guy who invented ping pong, or maybe he's just pioneering the sport of cooperative leaping off the ground. But by and large, my favorite part is the list of instructions on the side. I mean, just listen to this. Maintenance. Clean with coats. I don't think I have any coats lying around. Would a wattle do? Below 6-year child must play with adult. So kids under 6 are only allowed to play with adults? No kids their age, or kids in general? These kids are gonna have one boring childhood, or possibly the most fascinating one, depending on how they... And I'm cutting the joke off there. Before use, collect plastic pack. Okay. And finally, it suits everybody. You can pleasure in the excitement. Well, if the earlier remark was any indication, there will indeed be excitement and... I deserve that.